Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorthy, and today I'm very, very honored and excited to be interviewing a very special space champion, Mr. Clay Mowry. Clay is the CEO of AIAA, the world's largest aerospace technical society. Furthermore, he is a professor at Georgetown University, teaching the economics of space to undergraduate and graduate students. He is also an advisor to VAST, which is developing humanity's next generation space stations, and the president of the International Astronautical Foundation. Previously, he was the chief revenue officer of Voyager Technologies, vice president of sales, marketing, and customer experience at Blue Origin, and president of Arianespace. As you can see, Clay has a diverse experiences in the aerospace sector, both in the commercial aspect as well as an educational side. And so I was very intrigued by his background, and I'm excited to learn a little bit about his journey today. So welcome, Clay. Thank you so much for taking your time to inspire the next generation of aerospace leaders.
Thank you, Gitika. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you. To kick off our conversation, I was curious about your work at AIAA. Being the CEO, you have a lot of control on the vision of the organization. So far, being in the role in 2 years, what has been your main focus? And looking into the future of AIAA, where do you see it going and evolving in the next 10 years?
It's an honor to be part of this organization. I've been a lifelong member of AIAA, and I'm an AIAA fellow, which is a huge honor for me as well. But when Dan Dumbacher, my predecessor, told me he was stepping down from the role, it was something I really was excited about, putting my hat in the ring to run the organization because I know so much about it, and I'm so pleased to be here and working on the type of things that they do. It's about education, it's about career, it's about lifelong learning here as part of the aerospace sector. And so it's such a great organization. It's not a hard sell, by the way. Like everybody who's a member who's interested in it, they love the organization. Most people that are involved presented their first technical paper with us, right in college or just out of grad school. And they have great fond memories of being in one of our competitions, coming to their first, professional event and presenting or attending one of our conferences or forums. So it's a fantastic opportunity for me. And it's a challenging time right now, I would say, just broadly for societies and institutes like ours, because the membership model is not what it used to be. When I like to say that I grew up in an analog world. I'm not a digital native. I'm a digital immigrant. So I had to work in a world that was, typewriters and stuff when I was in college, right? And so all my kids who are my youngest just graduated from college, all grew up in a digital world. They've always had iPhones, and they've always well, I have one son who's Android, so they've always been in a digital format. They're super adept at communicating digitally, and so I'm trying to get this organization now to pivot to think about how we communicate with the next generation of aerospace professionals and students in a digital format. And so this is like a huge difference. I know not for people in your generation, for people in my generation, because we're used to doing things in a certain way. And so how do we transform that experience so that we can be relevant across the career arc? So from when you're 18 or even earlier, because we actually do work with high schools and middle schools. How are we relevant from the time you're a teenager through the time you're retired? And that's a very different thing to think about and approach to how we have to think about it holistically.
Definitely. That's a very interesting perspective because, as you mentioned, usually that's not something we think about, especially as students now, of what organizations maybe 20, 30 years ago looked like and how they're
Mhm.
evolving to cater for us. So, the education space, I'm sure, is kind of undergoing that transformation right now to keep up with all the technology that's growing and how students are utilizing it. So, I'm curious, like in your role so far, what has been the most, I guess, like surprising thing you came across or fact? Just something you were surprised about in the education space or AIAA, just anything that stood out to you?
Interesting. So a number of surprises that what I got here. So first of all, as an organization, not quite half, but let's say roughly 40% of our revenue, our income comes from our technical journals and papers. So it's a huge part of what we do as an organization. We have over 200,000 peer-reviewed technical journal articles that are in our library, and it's a huge driver for us. And I'd always known that this was a big part of AIAA, but when I got here, I was like, oh, this is kind of our. I'm going to use an Amazon reference here, but it's our flywheel basically for the organization. So, which means it's at the center of what we do, and it supports all the other things that we're doing. It's throwing off businesses and different lines of education that we do here in the organization. So, as I mentioned, you come, you present your first paper, at one of our events, and then it's peer reviewed, and you get it published in one of our technical journals, and then it goes into our library, and then people subscribe to that library, and it's used as a reference and becomes this flywheel because we keep adding new journal articles every year, and this just grows and grows and grows this technical library. Now my challenge is how do I figure out how do we train artificial intelligence, Gen AI, large language models to be able to look at that, which is highly technical with oftentimes a lot of formulas and graphics and charts and things in it, to be able to train it so that it actually knows what to look for. So when you're trying to do research or you're trying to design a new wingtip or a new aircraft engine or looking at structures, whatever the technical area is, or rocket, thrust vector control, that you can train when you do the query to find exactly what you want, right? And how does that generate back out? So that was, I think, a huge thing. The second thing was when I went out and started meeting our student branches around the country, and I started to talk to the students about, why are they members of AIAA? What are they getting out of the organization? How do they see it? And I guess I was surprised that a lot of the students think about it just as a student thing. They think about it something they do in college. And then when they leave college, they're like, all right, I don't do that anymore. And so we lose a ton of our student members. They don't convert when into professional members. And so, and it's a huge number. It's almost like 4 out of 5 students don't continue with us. And so I talk a lot with my staff about how do we make sure that A, the user experience, the UX, right, and B, the value proposition. What are they getting out of the organization? Will continue on. How do we keep them in the fold? How do we keep them as part of the organization? Give them benefits and something to do and learning that comes out of the organization, so that we don't lose all these. We have 9,000 student members, which, by the way, we're going to grow that number. It's got that number. That number will be, if I have anything to do with it, and I do, we're going to triple the size of that within a few years. So we're figuring out right now. I just got back from the IREC competition down in Midland, Texas. We signed up 600 new students just in one day at that event. So we're figuring out how to grow that population. So that was surprising. And I'd say finally that when I talked to students and I said, where do you get your information and news? What's the number one source? I'm going to ask you, what's the number one source for you? Where do you get your information and news?
If it's space related, I mean, a lot of times I'm on LinkedIn, but
Mm-hmm.
I am subscribed actually to the AIAA
Oh, nice.
email that I get every month. And I spend a lot of time just like Washington Post, New York Times for non-space related information, and I've come across space.com, but I'm not an active user.
So you are an old soul, let me put it that way, because you're more like me, right? But number one answer I got from all the student branches that I talked to was Instagram. And I was
Okay,
like,
I actually don't trust Instagram, so that's funny.
I was like, Instagram? And by the way, I have a new account now, AIAA Clay on Instagram. But I was like, I always thought of Instagram as yeah, it's social media and it's a great way to, like visually, it's a great way to show stuff that you're doing, but like information, news, this is where this is coming from. And so, and by the way, we have somebody full-time dedicated on my staff that does social media for the organization. And so we're really trying to figure out now, how do we use platforms? LinkedIn is also an excellent platform, right? Like, and we do a ton of stuff on LinkedIn. So I would say those are our two ones. And I'm also working right now with our team to institute a Slack channels that we're going to start putting in place. Because that was the number 2 answer I got, was Slack.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out, how do we put Slack channels in place? We have to meet the students and young professionals where they live, right? And so those are the 2 things I'm focused on, trying to figure out, how do we launch ways to communicate effectively. Right now we have a platform which was well-meaning called Engage, but you have to get in and log in, and then it's almost like very mechanical in terms of how you have to interface with it. And so, I know my kids, if I want their attention, I don't email them, I text them, right? Like, that's how I do it. Yeah. So,
No, that
yeah.
definitely makes sense. And,
Yeah.
and it's really nice to also hear that you all are considering what the students want for the organization in the future. And another interesting point that I thought you mentioned was like the carryover, because I think, especially in young professionals education, I think everyone hears of AIAA, but maybe the narrative of how you can stay after post-college or how you can get connected with mentors in the industry, even as a young professional who's in
Yes.
an early career role, I think is definitely something a lot of people lose sight in. Also, I think the idea of mentorship, um, I think a lot of times we think of mentorship, we're like, oh, you have to be a student, you have to be in college or high school, you have to be studying. Having a mentor even in your career is really important. And I think that's also a narrative that needs to be pushed out. Because I think sometimes you're like, oh, I'm 40 years old, I don't need a mentor. I mean, that's not true. You can have a
It's not
mentor
true.
at any
Yeah.
age.
Yeah. Yeah, I still am in touch with a couple of the folks that I mentored through both Brooke Owens Fellowship and uh, the um, the IAF program that we had for young space leaders. Jenna Tawana was my mentee. She works for iSpace now doing business development, and she and I get together at least a couple times a year and chat about her career and where she's heading. And she's married in her 30s. He's like they're like really kind of making her way, but she still comes to me and we talk. And I learn a lot from her too. Like I find that when I she asked me so many great questions when we were doing the mentorship thing during COVID, by the way, which was challenging. And I had to really think about like, she's like, well, how do you do that when you're doing sales marketing? How do you develop that? And I was like, had to really break down systematically, how do I do my job?
Right.
And it made me have a way better understanding about like, how do I do it? Like how do I actually think about it? And then how do I teach somebody about that? Right. Like it becomes a learning thing for the mentor as well.
Yeah, I have huge
Yeah.
respect for teachers. I think I understand something, and the moment I try to vocalize it, I'm like, oh, maybe I don't fully understand
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
I've had the same experience at Georgetown trying to teach space business. I did my first semester and I was like, I got to get better at this. Like I'm trying to communicate it. I'm not quite landing it.
Right. And that
Yeah.
actually leads me to like my next question about kind of that pivot towards education. How long have you been in your role at Georgetown, and what kind of led you to, I know you said it was it's a very easy sell to be a part of AIAA and like its mission, but what made you kind of realize that it was kind of the next step to focus on this education aspect as opposed to all the commercial space companies that are growing and booming? It's a very big time for commercial space. So kind
Yeah.
of what made you make that pivot?
Yeah, it was interesting. It's like a lot of the things I end up doing. It comes to me. It comes to me. It does. It's not like something I went out and well, I shouldn't say that. I pursued the job at AIAA. I've pursued a number of other jobs too, where I basically said I want that job and I'm going to try to figure out how do I get the job. Which, by the way, is some advice I would give to your listeners and whatever is that if you see somebody with a cool job and you want to figure out like how did they get that job, how do they do that job, how like go and talk to them, sit down, and have a cup of coffee, have lunch with them. Don't be aggressive about it, but just like learn from it and like figure it out. And then I did that, I think, with three different jobs I had that I've had in my careers where it was like, I was like, that's a really cool job. I wonder how that person got that job. And I sat down and talked with them. And then ultimately I ended up being able to interview for the job. Right. So there's a little bit of strategy around it. Now I've lost my train of thought. What was the question?
Yeah, no, my question was like
Oh,
kind of what,
Georgetown. Yeah.
yeah.
All right. So one of the interns in my office when I was at Voyager, Owen Chbani, who was a student at Georgetown and was head of the Georgetown University Space Initiative, their SEDS chapter,
Yeah.
invited me over to come speak at one of their chapter meetings. And so I went over there and I did a presentation for an hour one night and got to know all the students that are involved in the organization, the club. And I told them at the beginning and at the end of my talk, I said, my goal is to be the best speaker that you're going to have here during the course of your participation in this club. And they were all kind of looking at me and I said, all right, so here we go. And I gave this whole, 1 hour talk with them and had a huge Q&A. And I started talking to them about what their superpower is and all these things. And after it, Owen was like, you should come and teach here. You should teach a class here. And so he put me in touch with their faculty advisor, Sarah. She started talking to me. And then I met, so this is in the Walsh School of Foreign Affairs. By the way, it's interesting because it's not, in 2 weeks, I'm going to meet with the McDonough School, with the vice dean of the McDonough School, I have my MBA from the McDonough School of Business. And so I met with the head of the Walsh School of Foreign Affairs. It's under the Science, Technology, and International Affairs program. And he talked to me about it and said, would you be interested in being an adjunct professor? And it just seemed like a really natural thing at this point in my career. I've been doing space for 30 years and I've been mentoring a lot of young people and love giving back. But like the opportunity to teach at a school where I was a student was like super interesting to me because I had a mentor, a guy named John Dealey, who was president of Fairchild Industries. And he ended up being a mentor to me when I first started out in the space industry. And he taught me management. He was my strategic and management professor, strategy and management professor when I was at Georgetown. And I got an A in his class, but I remember his class, like of all the classes I took there,
Right.
he was like in the top two with the classes that I took. And so I was like, well, I'm going to be the new, and he's, by the way, he's passed on. So I I thought like I could be like John Dealey when I'm there. Like, so there was this like kind of motivation to me
Right.
to go and do it. And I had no idea how much hard work it would be to put together. I was like, oh, I know this stuff. I easy. No, now I have to organize it. I have to communicate it. I have to get guest speakers. I have to like do quizzes and tests and papers and come up with like team projects. And they say it's like 3 to 1, right? So every hour you're in the class, you have to spend 3 hours preparing for it. So I was teaching once a week, 2.5 hour course.
Wow.
So it was a lot of prep. And I had no idea what I was really getting into when I did it. You don't do it for the money, let me put it that way. You do it because you want to do it. But again, it was super interesting. I brought in 10 different guest speakers who are all my friends in the industry to come and help guest lecture every week. And I had an amazing experience. I had great students, 19 students in my class, a mix of graduate and undergraduate, and all of them interested in space.
Wow.
And so it was super fun. I loved it. It was a great experience. I'm going to do it again next year in the spring semester. And I'm going to get better at it. And I've guest lectured at University of Colorado, Boulder. I've guest lectured at Harvard Business School, at George Washington University, and other programs. And I'm going to a thing this summer, meeting with other management professors, because space business is now kind of a hot thing, I guess. A lot of schools want to teach it. So I'm going to meet with other management professors and try to learn from each other. And I got a lot of really good feedback from my students too about what was good about the class, what was bad about the class, what can I do better? Because I'm trying to improve the product. I want them to have an amazing experience. A lot of them told me it was like no other class they'd ever taken because of all these guest speakers about all these topics and it was much more like a straight up business but like practical class. And I think they had been much more in the theoretical kind of world. And so it was something very almost like an entrepreneurship class in some ways, you know? So it was interesting for a lot of these students that weren't necessarily business students, right, to come and take that class. And 2 or 3 of them came to me afterwards, like, I want to start a space business company now, like coming out of that class. So that was a huge impact for me.
Wow. Like as you're talking, I can clearly see that you were meant to be an educator, at least at some point in your life. And I'm so glad you found that. And to
Yeah.
see the impact that your teacher made on you is huge because I know many times it's a mentor or a teacher who really gives us the confidence to enter the space or in any industry, really kind of gives us that push. And so for me, it was like my middle school teacher initially. But after
Mhm.
that, I've had so many incredible mentors. One of my first ones is actually he was also an alma mater. His alma mater was Georgetown as well, Mr. Courtney Stad, and he's been
I
an
know Courtney well. Yeah, I know
yeah,
Courtney
yeah.
very
He
well.
was one of
Yeah.
my first mentors who got back to me on LinkedIn. So I know how huge mentors can be in shaping your career.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious also about, before we get into your journey, because I'm really curious, your passion is very evident. One thing you said that I thought was interesting was how space business was starting to become more interesting to a lot of schools. It's kind of like the new hot thing. I think space is starting to become more attractive to a lot of schools than it was maybe even 2, 3 years ago. And so I'm curious from your perspective, being both in the commercial and education space, how has, space been changing in the university setting? And do you think that universities are now looking into investing in space curriculum more than they have
Yeah.
in the past?
It's an excellent point. So it's changed tremendously in the 30 years I've been doing this. And I remember when I talked to John Dealey originally, I was like, can I actually do a career in space? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, I would have never thought as somebody without an engineering background. And by the way, John was a lawyer. He's a lawyer by training, and ended up being CEO of a company. He did a lot of work with XM satellite radio when XM Sirius satellite radio was being put together. Um, so he was like, absolutely, you can do this. And a lot of people tell me like, or ask me, what was my light bulb moment? So I'm in space by accident, by the way. I was working in the U.S. government. I was a presidential management fellow at the Commerce Department in the Office of Aerospace. And I ended up in Moscow in the early 90s negotiating a trade agreement with the Russian Space Agency so they could enter the launch marketplace. And I was standing in Khrunichev, which is the big rocket factory um, in Moscow, and in a sea of Russian proton rockets, thinking, "Oh my God, this is like I'm a child of the Cold War. I'm standing in this factory, going, this
Wow.
is incredible. I could actually do this for like a career. Like how?" how did this happen? So from that moment, roughly kind of just a little over 30 years ago, to figure out that, which was at that time, the space sector was the providence of superpowers, right? It's a strategic capability of nations, is how we thought about it. And so access to space limited to a few number of countries, huge budgets, huge investment, billions of dollars in infrastructure. And so it was very hard for to join that exclusive club, right?
Yeah.
And so what has happened now over the last, and I would say it's more in the last 10 to 15 years, it's not really over, because the first half of my experience in the space industry was kind of that old shuttle era. It was starting to build the space station, and it was still these kind of massive, big government programs that were driving the sector. And then in the last 15 years, and a lot of it's the advent of SpaceX, but also Blue Origin and Firefly, a lot of these other companies that have gotten the sector, it's the advent of small satellites, CubeSats and small sats, the miniaturization of that technology. And a lot of it's also as well is computer-aided design, additive manufacturing, having the tools and the software to be able to do the stuff that we do now for simulation to test. I always tell my students, you actually spend more money on the ground than you do in orbit. And people have a hard time believing that. They're like, no. And they also think, by the way, that the launch sector drives the whole rest of the industry. It's all about, and I'm like, launch is the smallest sector in the commercial space business. And they're like, what? Wait, that can't be right. And I show it to them like in dollar figures. So by the way, it is a super critical, and I did launch for over 25 years. It's a super critical. If you can't access space, you can't do anything in space, right? So it is a driver, don't get me wrong, but it is not where we make our money. And we make your money in space and applications. It's ones and zeros coming from satellites and spacecraft and GPS of the whole thing. So it has had a tremendous growth spurt. And let me just add on top of that, private capital, huge amount of private capital from not just the billionaires, but attracting money from family offices, from private equity, from governments that want to spur new industry and growth in their countries. So we've seen billions and billions and billions of dollars of private money get in. The barriers to launch, and putting a small, high school student can launch a CubeSat now. That was not the case when I was starting out in the sector, not at all. And so I always say this is the most exciting time in space in my 32 years in doing space. The future is now. Like, I wish I was your age, because it is a completely different place in space to be able to navigate now. And the tools you guys have and the access that you guys have is something we couldn't even dream about when I was in my 20s and 30s. So it's a very different place. Yeah.
It really is. And I think we always hear the term, the future, the future is space. And I think now we're starting to change that quote
Yeah.
of the future is space to the future of space is now. Like, we are here, like this
Yeah.
is it. And I definitely agree with you. And I'm so glad to hear that universities are starting to recognize that as well. Because as I mentioned, when I was in high school, or even now when I talk about my interest in aerospace medicine, or I mention how you can be a space lawyer or you can pursue space business, I still feel like there's a lot of pushback of, oh, is that a real career? And so once university starts legitimizing that, and we have that focus shift, and people are investing in actual courses and degrees and possible minors, I think that can really change the whole perspective and narrative about space careers and opportunities in this growing space economy.
Yeah, I'll give you which is Georgetown University does not have an astro engineering. It's not an engineering based school, right? And so it's not a big research center like University of Michigan or Purdue or MIT or Caltech. But yet they have a space club there, very active. They get a ton of students that want to get into the space sector, and they have sciences there, right? They have astrophysicists there and biologists that are teaching. They have courses in remote sensing applications and sciences. And so we're trying to figure out now as a faculty, and I'm friends with 3 or 4 of the other adjuncts that are in the plats who do take space security, space law, in other aspects. How do we create a certificate, basically in space studies for Georgetown, so that if you're not technical, or even if you are technical and you want to enter the sector, how do we give you that ability to do that as part of a Georgetown University experience? GW's, George Washington University has a great space policy institute here. There's lots of schools that are trying to tackle this. Harvard is teaching, Harvard Business School, where I went up and guest lectured, has a full-time class now on space business, taught by a real economist and Matt Wurtzel, and And these guys are great. The guys that have put together that, and now I actually have a textbook I can teach from, which is kind of amazing that somebody actually wrote a book that you can use as a guide to teach a class. So it's absolutely coming as a practice. And the sector is growing. You hear a lot about the $1 trillion space economy. So like there's a lot of focus on it. It's in the news every day. And that's a good thing, right? Like it's a good thing. And it's, people get all caught up in this billionaire discussion. It's not about that, right? It's really not.
Yeah, and I really do see the growth, and I'm excited for the next even just 5, 10 years to see how the commercial aspect of more space stations going up, and how that'll open up access to more commercial astronauts to go to space and the type of research we can conduct, and how that'll open up so many more conversations. So it's a very exciting future. But one question I really did want to get to was your journey. You mentioned kind of how you accidentally came into space. That was probably your aha moment that you were describing when you were in Russia. So
Yeah.
once you had that aha moment of, hey, this is maybe something I can actually do for a full-time career, how did you convert that into action? Because I think many times we are like, oh, would be really cool, or I'm already in a career and I want to pivot now, but it seems too difficult to pivot. So I think how did you take the skill sets that you had, even though you didn't have like a space formal training or anything, but convert your skills into the industry and kind of make that pivot?
Yeah. Let me start with the second part of what you just said and say that I talk a lot about, and I learned this, by the way, from Jeff Bezos when I was at Blue Origin. He talks a lot about one way and two-way doors in your career, right? Or in business, right? Like, so a one-way door is something where you make the decision, there's no going back, right? Like you've invested in this thing, you decided to go down a certain path, you're not going to go in reverse. You can't like shift the car or like turn the other way, right? But one-way doors are less common and less frequent than you think. And in life, there's a lot of two-way doors, right? Like you can go and try something, you can try a track, doesn't work out after 3 or 4 years, you can shift gears and you can go into another direction. You can reinvent yourself and your career. And I've done it several times, right? So I started my career in politics. Then I went in the government. Then I ran a trade association, which, by the way, is a job nobody ever thinks about when they're a kid. Oh, someday I'm going to grow up and run a trade association. Nobody ever says that. It was a great job. Like I learned a ton. I testified before Congress. I was on national and international television. I was at the center of the policy debate. And by the way, I'm not a space lawyer, and I'm filing with the Federal Communications Commission. I'm filing, like I'm helping write legislation on Capitol Hill. I'm like how? So and then I shifted and got into the business side of it. And I learned about rocket science and I learned about launch contracts and sales and marketing and branding and how to do customer relations and then how to do a launch failure review with an engineer, not just me, right? Like, but sitting in there and trying to answer questions from our customers about what happened. And then I pivoted to commercial space stations. And now I'm running a 501(c)(3) that's, like educationally focused. So I've had like 5 different careers in one. I've got like 5 jobs now. So it's like, a publisher of a magazine, a technical journalism magazines. I'm a leader of this institute. I'm the president of our foundation. I'm still the head of the IAF for another like 5 months. I'm teaching at church. Like I'm doing a whole bunch of stuff. So let me go to the first part of it, which is be a constant learner, right? Like try to figure out things. Don't Everybody's got imposter syndrome, right? Like even I have imposter syndrome. Sometimes I'm like, what am I doing here today? Why am I talking about this? Like, how did I get here? Um, so take a deep breath and know that life is about learning. Life is about trying to figure out what's the next step, and you can reinvent yourself. You can shift gears. The key to it is that not only that learning element, but I would say trying to become an expert in that segment or sector. Like read, talk to people, go out and network, get involved, give back, like build your network, and you'll be surprised at how you can learn and become an expert in whatever that thing is like right now. So like now I'm a space business expert. Okay. Like I wasn't before that. I was a super expert in export controls for satellites at one point in my career. I knew more about spectrum policy than, 99.9% of the world, right? Because about how satellite spectrum is working with terrestrial spectrum, how is it licensed, how does it go through the ITU? Like these are things where like you have to deep dive, get super granular, really understand whatever the topic is, and then you can play, right? Like, and it doesn't matter what your background is, right? Like, I'm not a radio frequency spectrum, person, but I learned it. Like, I spent the time to learn it and sit there and talk to people that are experts And then once you ingest that, you can go and do that job, right? So just figure out how to do that is really kind of the driver in it, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I think that's such important advice for anyone in any stage of their career. If there is something that you want to focus on, that deep dive and that like full focus on that one topic, figuring out a support system, mentors who can guide you there. You don't have to figure out everything by yourself, but also having that focus is so important of like, oh, this is what my specialty is, and here are my skills that I need to grow on.
Yep.
Having that sort of direction and that full force, I think is also very, very important. And so I'm curious, like, in your journey so far, have you had any obstacles? Because I think many times, I know I do this all the time. I look at someone's career and I'm like, oh, you're doing five different things right now, but you've like built so much of a reputation. You've had a great journey. And some we don't see kind of the non-linearity of that pathway or that journey. And so did you have any obstacles? And more importantly, how did you overcome them? Was it a mindset or was it kind of just pushing through? What was that journey like for you?
Ooh, wow, that's a big question. I'm trying to think about where to start here. So, a lot of what I do, like, so I'll start with this. I wasn't always a good communicator. I had a middle school teacher who made me stay after class to write. My social studies teacher, not my English teacher. She was like, you can do better. And she would make me stay after class and just rewrite stuff and rewrite it until I actually got it right. And then I ended up in honors English, and like when I got to college, I was one of the better writers. And I remember my college professor, English professor said, I want to write a letter to your high school English teacher to say thank you because you were well prepared for class. So it took me a while. The first presentation I ever gave in front of a class when I was in eighth grade, I fainted, literally fainted, had to go to the nurse's office. So I was so nervous. I was so not confident in what I was able to do and how to deliver. And now I do it for a living, more or less. I mean, I communicate for a living, and it takes practice. You have to really think about the mechanics of what you're doing. You have to overcome the fears and anxieties around your I would say, I don't know, deficiencies. I don't know what the right word is, but right, like where you're not maybe a natural at it. I tell this story a lot when I was in a fraternity in college, and again, accidentally, I became the president of the fraternity. Like it was not on my roadmap, and they were like, "You should run," and I was like, "I don't know." And then I ended up getting elected. And I remember the first dinner I had to do with all the alumni come back, and they have do a big meeting. It's like 200 people in this room, and I had like note cards, and I'm like reading from my note cards, like. And the next year, when I did it, after having done all the chapter meetings and meeting with the president of the university and presenting in front of the fraternity council and all these things, I went up there without any script and I talked for like 20 minutes and cracked jokes and like had everybody in the palm of my hand. I was like, wow, look at the, like in my head, I was like, look at how far I came in a year from practice, from like thinking about what I was trying to do, trying to get better at it, understanding the mechanics of communication, public speaking. I still have a lot of that experiences. I just gave a speech 2 days ago when I was at this IREC conference down in the rocket competition. There was 2,000 students there, and I was the last speaker. And I was like, oh boy, I better knock this out of the park when I get up there. I had to take a deep breath before I got on stage. I kind of like put it in my head what I'm going to do, and then get up there and like really try to bring the energy when I did it. But it takes practice. It takes work. I would say the same thing about rocket science and reading like payload users guides and everything I could get my hands on to try to absorb it. And then asking dumb questions of engineers, like why do we design it this way? Or why did the engine fail? Because of like what's the material science behind that? And like again, I'm not a scientist, but I have this kind of thirst for wanting to know the why. The why to me is always the most important question. Who, what, when, where, why? The why is always the most important question. Why is this? What is making this relationship work? And so I asked a ton of questions to the engineers. And by the way, engineers love to explain things to people. They love that's like their favorite thing. They get out a sheet of graph paper and they'll draw you a diagram. They get out the whiteboard and the markers, and they will show you exactly. They want to tell you why it works that way, or what the structural engineering behind it, or the thermal dynamics, or why do you release the satellite here because the stars trackers are here and then the batteries have to charge because it's stuff like that where you're like, all right, and then it all starts to fit together. So those things are super important of the learning piece. But like we were saying before, you deep dive, you gain confidence, and I'd say a lot of it is just practice. Just practice and getting yourself ready. I always say this to my kids, come prepared to class, right? Like, don't just like mail it in, like, come prepared to class. Do the reading the night before or talk to somebody who did the reading and like try to figure it out. Like, don't come into class just like, and you will not learn that way. That's not how it's going to work. So there's a little bit of work that comes along with it, right? Yeah.
That's beautiful. I
Yeah.
first of all, I was thinking throughout the interview actually, like how you were such an articulate speaker and how you just have your points. And it's just so like cool in a way to hear that journey of yours because I mean, just listening to your interview now, I was just thinking, oh my God, he's such an amazing speaker. But there was a lot of work behind that too, right? It's not like it was like a natural. I mean, some people are naturally gifted, but also that you can get to that point by working really, really hard and coming prepared, as you said. I think,
Mhm.
especially as like a young student, I can't speak for everyone, but from the experiences I've had and the friends I know, a lot of times we kind of are in a mindset that there are certain things we're good at and certain things we're bad at.
Right.
And we try to focus on the good things, which is good, but ignore and just kind of like push off the things we're bad at without trying to make a conscious effort of improving it. If that's something you're interested in doing, we tend to kind of be like, oh, that's not for me. But it could be for you. I think it's just kind of
Yeah.
getting past that mindset, like you said, and coming prepared and doing the hard work, and kind of pushing along. So it was really,
Absolutely. Yeah.
it was very inspiring to hear your story and to hear about your work today with AIAA and Georgetown and kind of where you've come in your journey so far. It was such an honor to speak with you today. So thank you so much for sharing your advice. I know I will definitely take it with me as I navigate my own career, and I'm sure everyone who's listening will as well. So thank you so much for doing this interview today with
Can
us.
I give one more piece of advice that I give a lot? I have a few stories that I relate back to this, but uh, uh, that kind of prove this point. But like when you're interviewing, so I can tell the difference between somebody who just went to my website and somebody who actually spent the time to understand what business am I in, who are my competitors, how am I positioned against those competitors. What they're asking the probing questions, right? Like during the interview. So they're trying to learn as much about interviews, by the way, are as much about you being like trying to answer the questions in the right way, but also about how are you engaging with the person on a personal level. And I tell this again to my kids all the time, which is figure out how to develop a personal relationship with the person that you're talking to.
Mhm.
Understand where they went to college. What do they like? What do they dislike? Try to find as much about them as you can to develop some kind of connection on a personal level. You're 10 times more likely to get the job if you can do that. And the other thing I tell people all the time is when you get into that interview, if you want to go work for that organization, if this is like your passion, what you want to do, when they say at the end of the interview to you, do you have any questions? Is there anything else you'd like to know? Is there something I could answer for you? That's the time when you look at them in the eye and you lean in and you say to them, I want this job. If you hire me, you won't be disappointed.
I will definitely remember that. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I actually,
That's what we want to hear as employers. We want to hear that you're passionate about coming to work for us, right? Like that's what we need.
right.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we wonder what to say or what is the right thing. And I think that's amazing advice. I will definitely keep that in mind and we'll actually share that with everyone who's listening as well. We'll like clip that part because I think we get that question every time. Do you have any more questions? And you're trying to come up with good questions to ask on the spot because you want to, sound like you really care. But it's good to know from the other side what they're actually looking for. So
That's
thank
how
you.
I got into Georgetown. I went and visited with the dean of admissions because I was on the wait list, and I told him like if you let me into this school, you won't be disappointed. I'm going to get involved. I'm going to get back. And he was like, I think he was a little stunned, right, that I like did it, and I don't know where it came from. By the way, it wasn't like I planned to say that, but I was like, I really want to go to school here, and I want you to know it. And same thing. If you tell the person like if you hire me, I'm going to really work hard, that's a huge advantage you have over all the other candidates who are like, oh, what's the benefit package or what's the, how many days off do I get or what's the, fine. That's all fine and good. But like, they really want to know, are you in? Like, are you in? I need somebody who's in, right? Who's really going to try to do the job. So
I love
yeah,
that. Yeah,
yeah,
and I think that's amazing advice to kind of push through and kind of give to the next generation. I've heard once that when you get rejected from something, I think it's very similar to the advice you said, you have to figure out why they said no and then kind of come prepared again, like you were mentioning, of hey, here are the things I can improve for next time, but
yeah.
really showing that commitment and that passion of hey, this is something I really want to do and chasing after that pathway, like through a lot of hard work. is going to get you through that door. And I love that, like what you said, during your Georgetown interview at the end, or like to get off the wait list. I think it's a beautiful statement, and it shows how you can change, not change, but you can really push through your goals if you just show that passion and that energy. It'll work out in some rooms, maybe not in all, but you'll get to where you need to get. So thank you
Yep.
so much again for doing this interview. I know, again, as I said, I will carry this advice with me, and I'm sure everyone who is listening will as well. So thank you for sharing your story with me.
Totally. It's my pleasure, really. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.